Buddhism? Have you had much experience with Buddhism?
I have read about 4 books, all pretty much beginners books.
Yes.
I haven't had any instruction from anybody, and a lot of the concepts are kind of difficult to grasp just by reading.
Yes, it's nice to have a teacher or a sangha, to attend. Have you been to the center?
I have not. I actually just discovered it today.
Oh, well, great. Welcome. I'm glad you took the initiative to join us. That is most auspicious. And do you live nearby the center? I mean, is it convenient for you to?
It's probably about 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's great. Well, the important thing, when I asked if you took refuge, one of the first coming on to the path of Buddhism is what we call taking refuge. And that is taking refuge in the Buddha, who's our guide. Excuse me, let me take care of this. That should have been turned off. Okay. So we take what are called refuge in the 3 jewels. And that is the Buddha, who's our guide and teacher, who is we are still under the influence of Shakyamuni Buddha, who lived about 2,600 years ago, was born in India and attained his enlightenment and continued to teach until he had his parinirvana at age 80. But we call the second jewel is Dharma, which is the teaching of the Buddha, which we'll be talking about tonight. And the third jewel that we take our refuge in is the Sangha, those enlightened members of who practice together, and we study together, and that forms the local Sangha. So you have a place to study and to practice and to be in communion with other like-minded people, which is considered very important. The Buddha's teaching, of course, is important, and but the Buddha lived 2,600 years ago. He's not here to pass along that teaching. And like you say, you can read books, but it's nice to have a community of like-minded people to study with. And that's really what the center is for, is to bring that into reality for us. So we take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, the teachings, and the noble Sangha, those who are here to practice together and to teach. So there's currently a book that's being read, and what we often do during this time is answer questions, and I may expound upon certain points that come from that reading, or just take on a particular topic. So, and so please do ask questions. Like you say, sometimes it's difficult to understand all the terminology. There's a lot of words. Sometimes there's Buddhist words in the way of Tibetan or Sanskrit. So it can be kind of confusing. So if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.
Okay, thank you.
So we usually begin by taking refuge. There's when we begin, and we say that 3 times before our practice. So I'm going to do that now. We're going to start with what's called refuge and raising bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is the mind of enlightenment that we strive to be like bodhisattvas. They have taken a vow not only for their own benefit to attain Buddhahood, but for all suffering beings. So when we practice, we generate this mind of enlightenment, this bodhicitta. And so I will just say it in the English, and you can just let it kind of wash over you. We'll say it 3 times. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and the noble Sangha. Through the merit of accomplishing the 6 perfections, may I achieve awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and the noble Sangha. Through the merit of accomplishing the 6 perfections, may I achieve awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and the noble Sangha. Through the merit of accomplishing the 6 perfections, may I achieve awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings. So that is the prayer of refuge and the cultivation of the mind of enlightenment, so that we're not just practicing from our own benefit, but we really wish all suffering beings to attain the state of Buddhahood as well. So that is how we begin our sessions. And
Can you say what the 6 are? I always forget.
the 6 perfections, yes.
Yeah.
Usually we start with generosity, and we go on patience. Let me just get them all right out here for you so we can not miss any. I think I have them in some kind of meaningful way here. Yeah, well, I want to explain those a little bit. Yes, the 6 perfections are the way of the Bodhisattva. This is how we attain Buddhahood, is through understanding the 4 Noble Truths, which was the first turning of the wheel of Dharma that the Buddha taught. And then there is the 6 perfections, which as one progresses along the path, we understand that in order to be of benefit to being, as I was saying, we need to establish ourselves in Buddhahood and to bring all beings to that same state. So that is done through the practice of what is called the 6 perfections. And that comes from having the right view as the way the Buddha taught it. And I want to make sure I talk about that just a little bit anyway. There's a number of teachings, and it can really seem vast, which it is vast. And we'll talk about meditation, and we'll sit for a little bit in a moment as well. But I do want to, now that the question was asked, if we can go through those 6 perfections. The Buddha's teaching can really be summed up as cultivating virtue in abundance and avoiding doing harm to oneself or others, and completely taming your mind. And so meditation is the way that we tame our mind. And the 6 virtues, or the 6 paramitas, as they're sometimes called, begins with generosity. That's the enlightened quality of the kind unselfishness and charity, giving to beings. And there are different kinds of generosity. And there is the further cultivation of ethics and morality. The ethics is the enlightened quality of virtuous and ethical behavior, morality, self-discipline, personal integrity, and harmlessness.
So does that, both of those fit under the discipline? Is that one? So generosity and then discipline, does that cover morality and ethics?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And there are exercises we can do to help cultivate these different aspects. The patience is usually considered the 3rd. These are done in order, and there's a kind of an increase in each of these qualities, starting with the generosity, and then morality and ethics, and patience. which is the enlightened quality of tolerance. We could certainly use a little bit more of that these days. Forbearance, acceptance. It's the essence, is the strength of mind and heart that enables us to face life's challenges, really, and difficulties without losing our composure and inner tranquility. We really can't accomplish much without patience. Things do take time, and certainly enlightenment takes time. So we have to be patient but persevering, and that is the next aspect. The fourth of the six is considered joyous effort or enthusiastic perseverance. So joyous effort or enthusiastic perseverance is the enlightened quality of energy, having vigor and vitality, endurance, diligence, enthusiasm for our practice, and certainly persistence. You have to be persistent, and maybe just we don't practice. Today I'll meditate, and maybe tomorrow we'll see. I mean, it is something just like eating, sleeping, and it is part of our daily routine. But it needs to really come in order to practice the first three paramitas of generosity and virtuous conduct and patience in the face of difficulties. We need this paramita of joyous effort, of perseverance. This gives us the energy and endurance to continue on the path. So one of the faults of our practice is either not starting, and the other one is not finishing. So we have to carry out the practice of the Dharma and pursue the goal of enlightenment for the benefit of beings. So that has to do with our joyous perseverance, enthusiastic effort. And the fifth is considered concentration. This is the enlightened quality of meditation and contemplation, mindfulness. We hear a lot about mindfulness, but it gives us the mental stability. It makes our mind workable. So usually we talk about shamatha or tranquility meditation. Begin taming the mind so that it is workable. When we say stay, it stays. And we can attend to all kinds of different things when the mind is tamed. That's what I said, that there are three aspects. So cultivate virtue and avoid wrongdoing and taming our minds. Our minds have the tendency to be very distracted, as you may have noticed, and restless, always moving from one thought or feeling to another. And if we don't stabilize the mind with meditative contemplation to quiet our restless mind, we'll just keep engaging in the same habitual patterns and of thought and behavior. And the last one is wisdom. So this is the culmination, really, of the first five that we mentioned, these five perfections. And it is the light and quality of, we're talking about transcendental wisdom, insight, and understanding. It has to do with realizing emptiness. And this is the quality of supreme wisdom. It's the highest understanding, and knowing the human beings, the highest the human being can attain. It is perfected quality of insight and total clarity. So this discriminating awareness comes as we cultivate the other five perfections: patience, joyful effort, generosity, ethics, concentration. This awakens wisdom within us, and it is the way of the Bodhisattva. This is how we attain perfect Buddhahood, by perfecting those particular qualities that we just mentioned. So that was kind of a long answer to that question. What are those six? So those are the six perfections, or sometimes called the six paramitas. All right. So Michael, is there anything else that you wanted to mention before we go on?
Well, I think, we had been reading or discussing the antidotes to anger and jealousy. I think that was the last section. We've been reading the ethical foundations of practice, but the last section that we read was dealing with antidotes to anger and jealousy. And
Well, that's
that's,
interesting because the antidote to anger is patience, you know. So that's appropriate to be talking about patience as an antidote to those things that these negative habitual patterns that we've been cultivating since beginningless time. But there is an antidote to that. And this six paramitas are those is the antidote to our suffering. And that in particular, those things that you mentioned, it relates to patience.
I think the other thing that, and we mentioned this before, but I want to see if anyone else has any questions before we talk about, the difference between Tantra and Sutra, where we're also talking about the three vehicles as well.
Yeah, okay. So yes, we will talk about those things as well. So as a further just introduction, I want to thank all of you for showing up. First of all, I want to express my appreciation and happiness at your interest in learning the guidelines for practice in your life. The practices of meditation and mindfulness ultimately lead to the awakening of our mind's true nature, the wisdom and compassion. And we start our path by establishing the motivation, to study these teachings for the benefit, as we talked about, both for ourselves and others. And sometimes we can just start by asking ourselves, what kind of person do we want to be? The most important qualification at the beginning is having a strong motivation to change your life for the better by adopting these new positive habits that are the foundation of our future happiness. So there are prayers that we do when we say, may you have happiness, and the causes of happiness. The causes of happiness are positive habits, are virtuous activities. And we also say, may you be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. The causes of suffering are just, as we mentioned right from the get-go, is staying away from wrongdoing and hurting ourselves or others. That is the what creates suffering for us. So we cultivate virtue and we avoid the wrongdoing. So we can learn to uproot our negative habits and replace them with positive, healthy habits. But it does require some effort and mindfulness. Mindfulness is a way of training yourself to become aware of your own mind. And usually we're not so aware, we're just kind of on an automatic pilot. So this is done through the cultivation of meditation practices that we will be studying. And it is a way to end our suffering and to achieve true and lasting happiness. So the instructions that you've been getting at the center and that we'll cover as we continue, emphasis, on our direct inner experience in applying the truths that were revealed by the Buddha. And the Buddha is often called the peerless physician because of his words. He said, my teaching is about suffering and how to end it. A lot of people think that Buddhism is, you guys always talking about suffering, but really the Buddha said he was here to end our suffering, and his teaching was about ending suffering. It's the underlying purpose, so it is not unlike the purpose is to diagnose and offer a remedy for our suffering and discontent. His genius, the Buddha's genius, was the ability to analyze our suffering and then show us how to apply this wisdom as a remedy to achieve our own serenity and peace of mind. So the Buddha didn't come to teach a new religion or convert anyone. He welcomed everyone and taught everyone who wished to wake up to the truth. And again, as I mentioned, the Buddha's teaching arose and spread in India over 2,600 years ago. And people were struggling with conditions of restlessness and fear and skepticism, and spiritual revitalization and nourishment were needed, not unlike our present time. And this is why Buddhism, I think, is so much relevance and appeal to our modern world, and is making such a strong resurgence, which it is. So it spread from India to China, Japan, Tibet, and Southeast Asia, and more recently to the West. And despite certain cultural differences, it has proven capable of peacefully transforming the lives of millions of people around the world. Buddhism is certainly one of the oldest of the world's religions and remains alive and relevant as it was for its earlier followers. And many scholars and adherents to these teachings, including myself, see it more as a mind science and a supreme psychology than as a religion. Anyone can derive the healing benefit in body, mind, and spirit if these teachings are applied consistently in our daily life. And that's really how they have to be done. It's not just a meditation on the cushion. This is an application every day, every moment. We strive to have the proper motivation to progress. And we all want to be happy. We don't want to suffer. So we have the tools that the Buddha taught us. And if they are consistently applied, then our lives will be much happier, actually. Implementing these practices into our daily lives can be daunting. It's not a quick fix, but time and effort are required to change these habitual negative patterns that that cause our suffering. And because, as I was saying, we've been cultivating them for years and even lifetimes. The Buddha taught us about karma and reincarnation. And as a Buddhist monk, I am presenting the Buddhist view as it was taught to me by my teachers. And I will be sharing this perspective on the nature of reality and of meditation practices, leading ultimately, to experiencing the direct awareness and clarity of your own mind. So we'll be going through these things. And just to summarize, the three aspirations are to practice and uphold is to cultivate excellent virtue in abundance, to avoid wrongdoing and harmful actions, and completely tame your mind. This is the teaching of the Buddha. I know it sounds simple to say, but it can be hard to follow. And there are many ways to practice these profound aspirations. And all spiritual traditions, I think, profess to teach behaviors that lead to a happy and fulfilled life. But the proof of the wisdom of the teaching always lies in the direct experience of its application in your life. And the Buddha said to, put this teaching to the test. We listen, we contemplate, and we practice these instructions. And just as when you see a doctor for a problem you are having, with these teachings, you will become aware of the pervasiveness of suffering, which is the problem that the Buddha is addressing. We get the diagnosis. There's a reason why we are suffering, and there's a prognosis. He says we can get over this problem, and there's a treatment or a cure. These are the Four Noble Truths, which we will discuss along the way to cure our disease. So we must take the medicine and follow the doctor's instructions until we get the desired result, which is total liberation in Buddhahood. So be a good patient. And like patients that I see, we wish to escape pain and suffering. So we follow the advice of this learned physician and spiritual friend. And as you've probably already seen, this perspective is multifaceted approach to health and healing, but it does offer a transformative process of change that is an opportunity for each of us to awaken to the true potential of who we are and what we can be. We have now set the stage, to revisit the question, what kind of a person do I want to be? So you might ask yourself that question. And if we understand the teachings of the Buddha, and we understand that we are the ones who are responsible for our happiness and for our suffering, it gives us a certain impulse or hopefully a motivation to practice. So we said that there are, when the Buddha became enlightened under the Bodhi tree, his first turning of the wheel of Dharma was the Four Noble Truths. And I think you've probably gone over those in your reading. That is, if you understand the Four Noble Truths, you understand the teaching of the Buddha. But briefly, we can mention those. Of the three, the first is called the Shravakayana or Theravada. It's sometimes called the Hinayana path, which literally means lesser vehicles. So, but this is not to demean or diminish the importance of this Shravakayana or Theravada tradition. In his first teaching, the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, as I say, which is the foundation of all of the Buddha's teaching, and all schools of Buddhism subscribe to this. So the Four Noble Truths briefly are: first, the truth of suffering; second, the truth of the origin of suffering; third, the truth of the cessation of suffering; and fourth, the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. And he presented these four truths in two sets of two. And if we examine them closely, these Four Noble Truths, we'll find that the first noble truth, suffering, is the result caused by the second noble truth, the origin of suffering. And the third noble truth, the cessation of suffering, is seen as the result of the fourth noble truth, the path that leads to the cessation of suffering, the Noble Eightfold Path. So simply put, we see that the Four Noble Truths are causes and results. So the first two truths are the causes that result in suffering, and the second two truths are the causes that result in nirvana or enlightenment or freedom from suffering. And we can go into greater detail on these Four Noble Truths if you like. But any questions about anything so far?
Could you talk a little bit more in depth about specifically about the cause of suffering, and where, suffering where does our suffering come from? We talked about this beginningless time idea of suffering. If you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, the cause of suffering, the second noble truth, is the diagnosis of the cause of the origin of our suffering. Once we realize, that suffering, disease, or dissatisfaction exists, we next discover where it comes from. And the Buddha taught that our suffering originates in our false belief in a truly existent, permanent self. It is from this fixation that arises what are called the three poisons of attachment, aggression, and delusion. So from these poisons come further negative emotions and all aspects of suffering. When we begin to look deeper into our behavior and body, speech, and mind, we realize that the source of our suffering that afflicts us is our own mind and attitude. If we want to overcome our experience of suffering, we will have to investigate and learn how to uproot the endless forms of excessive desire, craving, grasping, clinging, and attachment. And why should we uproot these tendencies? The Buddha taught that suffering is connected to our actions. And this is why, to eliminate suffering, we must become aware of the second noble truth of dependent origination. So when we speak about an action, we are speaking about karmic consequences of an action. We are constantly accumulating three different categories or types of karma, depending upon our motivation and intention of our actions. They can be negative, positive, or neutral. So whatever thoughts or actions we engage in will leave its karmic residue in our mind that is either positive, negative, or neutral, depending upon our motivations and intentions. For example, a thought of such as hatred that has tremendous energy and strength behind it will leave its karmic seed or trace in our mind stream. And that will manifest as hatred again when the causes and conditions arise. It's like planting an acorn. It will result in an oak tree. If we have that seed, of an oak tree, the acorn, it's the only thing that's going to result is an oak tree. You're not going to get broccoli. You're not going to get an orange tree. You're going to get an oak tree. So when we talk about dependent origination, we are talking about the root cause of suffering, which is karma, and the disturbing emotions. The Sanskrit word is kleshas. You may hear that word kleshas. It basically means mental defilement. But karma is a Sanskrit word and means activity, and klesha is a Sanskrit word and means mental defilement or mental poison. And those unfamiliar with the Buddha's teaching might attribute happiness and suffering to some external cause. They may think that happiness and suffering come from something outside of our control. However, what we experience is not dependent on external forces, but our own karmic causes and conditions. And with this understanding, we can skillfully begin to remove or uproot those causes of suffering. So those are the causes. Does that answer your question, Mike?
Yes, no, perfect.
Okay. So, we should also, I think, and we'll go on from there and talk about the cessation of suffering, which is the third noble truth. I think it's good that we just talk about this a little bit, which is the goal. This is probably the most important. The third noble truth is probably the most important of the four, because it is the reason the Buddha came to teach. He said he was here to show us the way to end our suffering and free ourselves from torment and suffering and disillusionment and all kinds of negative emotions. So if the Buddha stopped with the first two, there's suffering and there's the cause of suffering, that would be very unfortunate indeed. We can first look at how, given our human condition, suffering and dissatisfactions are ubiquitous in our lives. Then we looked at the causes of the suffering, from the three poisons, karmic causes and conditions, and our false belief in a truly existent permanent self. So this third noble truth, the truth of the cessation of suffering, the Buddha taught that there is a remedy for the suffering that pervades our samsaric existence. And you may not be familiar with the word samsara, but it's one that you will come across when you read Buddhism. Samsara means because of our misunderstanding of the nature of reality, we continually go round and round life after life. And our experience of old age, sickness, and death, rebirth, is a result of our accumulated karma experienced in previous lives up till now. And that's, we are samsaric beings because we have not awakened to the truth of our own Buddha nature. We will continue to reincarnate life after life until our karmic seeds are finally exhausted and Buddhahood is achieved. But the good news is that we do have control over our suffering, as the Buddha taught. We are the only ones responsible for our karma and disturbing emotions. We ourselves create it. We're the only ones that can uproot it and change it. We don't need to look to anyone else to remove the cause of suffering. No one else can do it for us. As we have seen in the truth of dependent origination, what we experience is entirely in our hands. Put simply, virtuous actions result in happiness and unvirtuous actions result in suffering. Fortunately, our suffering is only temporary. We can change it, we can go beyond it while still living in this world. It is possible to achieve real peace of mind in this life. And the Buddha showed us the path to that. One's mind will no longer be afflicted by mental delusions and emotional afflictions. And we can rest the mind in the mind's clear awareness. We can be at peace, in tranquility, and at ease. When we have discovered the origin of suffering and have uprooted its causes, our ego clinging and disturbing emotions will cease. In this state, all mental delusion and emotional afflictions have been overcome, and the mind is liberated from those habitual fixations. So we've talked about suffering, we've talked about the cause of suffering, and we've talked about the way that there is a way out of that suffering. So I guess we should probably also mention the truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering. Now that we've come this far, the fourth noble truth, called the truth of the path, because it leads to the ultimate goal. Any question thus far about anything that I've mentioned before we just finish up with the Noble Eightfold Path, the path leading to the cessation of suffering? Are we doing okay so far?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
This is Grace. Very good to see you again, Lama Losang.
Thank you, Grace.
Yeah, great to see you again, and thank you for sharing your insight with us.
Yes, my pleasure.
I have more of a thought and an observation than a question, and I know that you probably have some good insight on this one, but have to admit, I guess in my own journey along this spiritual path that you've just discussed, I have to admit it almost to me when I started and as I continue, that it just seems such a simple, almost magical antidote to how we self-inflict suffering and pain onto ourselves. And, you know, making that observation for myself has been really very good in my life. And then I look around and I notice how much people cannot get to this, even get on a path, or even get past the point of looking inwardly and even admitting or taking responsibility for their own sense of being.
That's true. That's why the world is the way it is.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. It's just that I still, I just still, it just still baffles me. It
Yeah,
just
you
still
would think that people would
baffles me.
see the truth. It's right there in front of their face, and it's
And
relatively
it's
simple.
not hard.
It's the
Yeah.
golden rule: do unto others, you would have them do unto you. You know, be kind and
Yeah.
cultivate virtue, avoid wrongdoing, and tame your mind. You know, that is the thing. But people don't have not been led to that, have not been trained in that, and left to our own devices. That's why this is such a powerful time. We are still have the teachings of the Buddha available to us, and you're very fortunate. We're all very fortunate to have the merit to have come across this. It is not an accident, though. It is due to merit, and it's due to past lives as well, that we've accumulated the merit and the understanding and the wisdom to see the truth. Although it is there, and we all are the truth, you know, internally. We have Buddha nature. Everyone has Buddha nature. All sentient beings have Buddha nature, but it doesn't mean we realize it. And we talk about this precious human birth, which is just that. But it's precious only if we use it in a positive way. Since beginningless time, we have been going round and round, but now we do have the opportunity to wake up. So we must use this time accordingly. And as you look around, you see there's a lot of people who are not, and it just leads to more and more suffering. You can see the truth in that.
Yeah, and you know, being an optimist, I'm first grateful for the pioneers before me, long before me, and the pioneers I'm talking about are the folks from the West, right, who had the courage to embrace Eastern, right? So, I mean, there were a lot of pioneers, you know, Americans, Brits, Europeans, right, who had the courage to embrace Eastern spiritualism,
They had the karma, it
Yeah.
doesn't mean, I mean, it's not an Indian thing to have Buddha nature.
Right.
It's our nature, no matter what your culture is, no matter what your race is, no matter what your gender is. We all have that, but do we realize it? Generally not, but we have the capacity if we're shown, and if we can just listen and really cultivate the virtue of meditation. We can quiet our mind and not be disturbed by all of those the things that attract us here, there, and the next place. We are just so distracted by the world, and that is the thing that really deters us from our practice. But once we understand the truth and dedicate ourselves to it, it's a relatively simple process.
Indeed. Well said. And thank you so much for being an inspiration.
Yes.
I mean, really an example and an inspiration. Thank you so much.
Well, good. And I started off by thanking all of you for taking the time to be here and to listen to the teachings. And so we listen, we contemplate them, and we practice them. It's not enough just to listen to them and it can go in one ear and out the other. We have to consider them. We have to practice them. We have to realize them and make them our own. So that is really important to understand. And so I really appreciate that you've taken the time to do this. That is an example of the cultivation of merit. Before we finish, we'll dedicate the merit so that all beings can benefit from our practice. And that's really the intent, to cultivate bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, the path of the Buddhas. And that's really what we're talking about next, is the truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering, the fourth noble truth. So that was a good segue to this, the truth of the path, because it leads to the ultimate goal.
Thank you.
So we follow the path step by step and stage by stage until we arrive at the end of the path. This is the cure that leads to the cessation of suffering. When the Buddha taught these Four Noble Truths, he showed the cause and effect relationship. He showed how neither our suffering nor our liberation are random occurrences. There is a cause for our suffering, and equally a cause for the ending of our suffering and achieving liberation. So what is the means that was taught to achieve the goal of liberation? The method for progressing along the path to enlightenment is known as the Eightfold Noble Path. So it consists of training in the three areas of morality, meditation, and wisdom. Morality means cultivating virtue through discipline to protect oneself. Mike was mentioning, that there is these three trainings: morality, meditation, and wisdom. So we talked about the 6 paramitas. So that is also these areas that we cultivate: morality, meditation, and wisdom. Morality means cultivating virtue through discipline to protect oneself from wrongdoing and accumulating negative karma that leads to suffering. So the Eightfold Path specifically are called right speech, right action, right livelihood, and right effort. These are the ones for and then the training in meditation or samadhi is through the cultivation of tranquility meditation, such as shamatha, and the penetrating insight of vipassana. And it includes right mindfulness and right concentration. And the Noble Eightfold Path includes the following trainings in a right view, a right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So these provide the methods for working with and overcoming our ego clinging and disturbing emotions. This is called the path of individual liberation, known as the foundation vehicle or Theravada, and is the path of the Arhats and is followed by all schools of Buddhism, as I mentioned. And if we are to follow this Eightfold Path, it's essential that we know what that path is and how to practice it correctly. I didn't really intend to go through the eightfold path, but should we mention it briefly, what these eight, what the eight?
Yes, please. Yes, always good to hear it again and again.
Okay, so we begin, of course, with right view. This is the guide to the entire path. It is the correct understanding of the Buddhist teaching on the middle way, and not falling into extremes of eternalism or nihilism. It is important that we have an experiential understanding and not just an intellectual or theoretical knowledge of this path. And we have to accept responsibility for our progress. You know, we must take responsibility for our destiny. As we were mentioning, we may not be able to change circumstances in our life, but we can change our responses to them. Our views and beliefs are key in determining our attitudes and actions. Our views about ourselves and our world shape our perceptions and establish our values. So this all comes from the correct view. They create the lens through which we interpret the world and the meaning of our existence. So knowing that everything arises due to causes and conditions enables us not to fall into the two extremes. The right view is the foundation of our spiritual journey. And as we see, there are many levels of the Buddha's teachings. There's the Theravada teachings, as I mentioned, the foundation vehicle, the Mahayana teachings, and the Vajrayana teachings that include our Mahamudra lineage teachings. Each of these traditions has developed its way of defining the teachings of the Buddha, and it is important that we continuously strive to develop the right view in our meditation and post-meditation practice. So right view is the first and foremost of the Noble Eightfold Path. Then right thought, you know, which expands the realization of how our thoughts and emotions are linked together. This includes the cultivation of proper motivation and scrutinizing our habitual self-centered ways of thinking to a more altruistic way of thinking. The Buddha said, as you think, you become. Indulging in negative thoughts leads to negative actions in body, speech, and mind. On the other hand, thinking in a positive way has a positive effect on our emotions and our actions. We become more loving, caring, compassionate to ourselves and with others. This is based on there's three aspects that we can consider when we think about this. And they are renunciation. You know, we think of renunciation like a monk, but renunciation is much more broad than that. It means not clinging or not attaching ourselves to things. We know that all things are ephemeral. All things that are born are going to pass away. All things that are created are going to dissolve and be gone. So we understand and disengage from the world. There's 8 worldly actions. There's a variety of things, but the cultivating of renunciation to a degree is important for us on the path, having goodwill towards others, and basically harmlessness. You know, we don't want to hurt, or ahimsa. Ahimsa is a Sanskrit word that means harmlessness, and you will see that in the texts. These 3 aspects help to develop our wisdom and the practice of bodhicitta, which is essential. You know, we can train our mind. This is enhanced by meditation. So meditation has always been an important part of the path. So we can meditate on the suffering inherent in our constant pursuit of worldly desires and gently lead our mind toward greater renunciation. The meditation on loving kindness is the best remedy for anger and ill will. And the most effective antidote for harmlessness is meditation on compassion. In our meditation practice, we begin with developing our motivation. We are doing the meditation for the benefit of all beings. And when we sit for our practice, hopefully it's a daily practice, and you have, a place where you do your practice at home. You've set up a little shrine of some sort with a picture of your teacher, or a flower, or incense, or the various things that turn your mind to the Dharma. And at the end of your meditation, you dedicate the merit that's generated from doing the practice for the benefit of all beings and their enlightenment. In this way, we can develop the right intention every time we meditate. The third is right speech, which means becoming aware of our speech. This step on the Noble Eightfold Path comes under morality as well. And our speech is very important. And we can tell a lot about a person from their speech. We can't see another person's mind, so we often judge or are judged by our behavior and our speech. We should train in being mindful over our speech. We should know the consequences of our speech. Is it harmful or helpful? What are some examples that we can do to develop excellent speech? One thing is reciting mantras, for example, such as Om Mani Padme Hum, the mantra of Chenrezig, which is done, at the center there. Chenrezig is the example of loving kindness and compassion of all the Buddhas, the Bodhisattva of great compassion. And mantra means mind protection. The word mantra means mind protection in Sanskrit. So mantras such as this can be a powerful tool in transmuting negative emotions by disengaging from the negative emotions and turning your mind to the Dharma through mantra recitation. By being mindful of right speech, we are developing a conscious awareness of words and what we are saying. Now more than ever, our speech can have tremendous capacity for good or bad consequences. We have a wide range of arenas, where we express ourselves and we interact in social media and other forms of digital communication. And right speech has 4 elements. The first is abstaining from false speech or lying and cultivating truthful speech. The second is abstaining from slanderous speech and cultivating speech that promotes friendship and harmony. The third is abstaining from harsh speech, yelling, insulting, sarcasm. And the fourth is abstaining from idle chatter. What do you listen to, on the radio, on television, or read in magazines? This is also considered an aspect of speech that is harmful and hurtful. So we often indulge in unskillful forms of speech, such as lying, gossip, harsh words, divisive speech. And this has a direct influence on our temperament and demeanor. We try to be truthful through this difficult time in society, and we manipulate the truth. It seems it has turned falsehood into an art form when we read about certain things and people twist and turn the truth to their liking. But we have to be skillful in our speech. Right action is behaving consciously in ways that do not hurt or harm others and being cognizant of the effects of our behaviors on others. We do many things and everything we do has a consequence. With the right motivation, we act in ways that benefit ourselves and others. I keep saying that, we have to, we're not only practicing for ourselves, we can analyze the quality of our actions and discern between what is beneficial and what is not. We have to have that discriminating and discerning awareness. There is a story about a monk who was trying to improve his behavior. And what he would do is, for every skillful action in body, speech, and mind, he would put a white stone in his pocket. And at the end of the day, he would check his pockets and he would put a black stone in for negative things. And he would check for black and white stones. And at the end of the day, they were relatively equal. But gradually, as he did this practice more and more, he became more mindful of his behavior. And at the end of the day, he only had white stones. So we may do that kind of practice in our mind with the white stones and black stones. And so we have an idea of purifying our actions of the body. We take 5 precepts. Lay practitioners take 5 precepts that are not killing, not taking that which is not given, not stealing, not lying. We're talking about right speech here, not lying and not misusing intoxicants and not engaging in sexual misconduct. Those 5, not killing, not taking what is not given, not lying, not misusing intoxicants, and not engaging in sexual misconduct. So the reason often people ask, why do you abstain from intoxicants? Well, we abstain from the overuse of intoxicants because it dulls the mind. And we use it as a form of escape. And over time, it can lead to addiction. So perhaps the most important reason to refrain from intoxicants is to keep to keep it moderate, is to prevent bad behavior and the consequent bad karma that goes with that. When under the influence of a drug or intoxicant that affects mental clarity, we are more vulnerable to hurting ourselves and others, causing suffering that leads to regret and remorse. So the Buddha advised, we cultivate mindfulness in all of our activities. It's as simple as doing good deeds. I mentioned the golden rule: do unto others, you would have them do unto you. The golden rule. So right livelihood is another one of the Noble Eightfold Path. So this is an important one. We spend a lot of our time in the work domain, and it is concerned with our capacity to earn a living without causing harm to ourselves or others. And it has always been based on the principle of ahimsa, or harmlessness. So as we know, our livelihood means more than just our job, but also all of our main daily activities and how we spend most of our time to provide the necessities that we need to have: food, clothes, a roof over our head, and so on. We spend much of our time working. Unfortunately, there are many businesses that seem more interested in profit margins than ethics, and we must try to choose a career that helps people and certainly doesn't hurt them. So we can at least avoid jobs that involve killing or working in industries that pollute or damage our environment, etc. Although many jobs seem harmless enough, we need to look closely at what the company we may work for actually does, and avoid working with or for companies that cause harm to people, animals, the environment. The bottom line is our work should be legal, nonviolent, honest, and not cause harm to others. We do not wish to cause death, harm, cruelty, physical or mental pain to any living being as a consequence of how we are earning a living. Nor would we invest our resources in companies that do not promote and foster life. People have stocks, they have other investments. So we don't want to invest our stocks in war, in bombs, in those things that are made for one reason only, and that is for war or for destruction and harming beings. So that is right livelihood.
Seems like a difficult one, Lama Losang, in our ultra capitalistic society. Like the deeper you dig, the more you find more issues with everything.
It's true, but we need to dig, and we need to, we want to do our job and promote that which is healing and helpful. So yes, we do have to be honest about that, and we do the best we can. Certainly, if you're contributing to a company that is clearly mismanaging things to create, well, I say mismanaging, they may be managing perfectly well, but their intent is to do harm and make a profit for their shareholders. But there's more to life than that. And as Buddhists, we really are addressing that in this particular situation of right livelihood. I'm not saying it's easy, but we really do have to take a look and make sure that we're doing the best we can to live a life that is in harmony with our goals and our aspirations. Any other comment about that? Right. So the next one is right effort. This is essential to accomplish anything in life. Effort and diligence are, support all the other activities. There are two kinds of efforts in the Tibetan word sundru in Tibetan has the connotation of joy or enthusiasm. So this effort is certainly what is needed on the path to total freedom from suffering, the attainment of liberation. We make the joyful effort and have enthusiasm for our meditation practice to uproot unwholesome thoughts and emotions as they arise. We see them as they arise. As we become more adept in our practice, we don't have to be overtaken by them. We see them as they arise, and then we actually have the freedom to choose. Do I really want to act in this negative kind of way that's going to lead to more suffering for myself because of the wrong action? Or am I going to disengage from this and not create a negative circumstance for myself? This will ultimately stop them from arising. So proper effort is energy needed to be aware and awake in each moment and to overcome our laziness. With right effort, we ensure our energy is directed to wholesome states of mind. The importance of right effort is greatly stressed. To make progress again on the path requires diligence, exertion, perseverance, and no one can do this for us. Our destiny is in our hands. With the right effort, all things are possible and we can achieve the goal, and no one can do it for us. We can't blame anyone but ourselves for our progress or lack thereof. So that is the aspect of right effort. Then the seventh is right mindfulness. So this is increasing awareness and attention to our thoughts, emotions, feelings, speech, and behavior. In order to achieve a superior concentration, we are cultivating mindfulness, the ability to rest the mind in its natural state of clear awareness, or samadhi. In our meditation, when we have mindfulness, we are very clear about what is happening. It is important not to lose the thread of meditation between meditation sessions. So we carry this meditative aspect, this clarity. The nature of mind is just pure awareness. And we want to continue this pure awareness as much as possible without distraction. And we learn how to carry the power of our meditation into our daily life. We become more conscious of our experience and have the capacity to make choices as how we wish to respond to a situation. Our response to a situation doesn't have to be our usual habitual knee-jerk reaction, but a thoughtful, measured response to the current situation, so that we're no longer reactive. We become truly responsible for our behavior. Mindfulness is integral to our practice of meditation and facilitates the attainment of mental stability. So we train our mind to remain in the present, noting the arising of thoughts as they arise without judgment or interpretation. Mindfulness meditation grounds the mind firmly in the present. We are usually more like time travelers. I often use that example. We are frequently reflecting with nostalgia on the past or projecting some fear or worry into the future, but rarely are we in the perfection of this present moment, which is all we have. The past is past. We can't change the past, and the future is not here yet. We just project and make things up. But what we can do is be present in this moment. And lastly is a right concentration or right meditation. This gives us the capacity to progress in our meditation practice. The mind becomes focused and stable. We become less distracted and able to maintain our attention and awareness steady for an extended periods of time. Without the other previous steps on the Noble Eightfold Path, right concentration cannot arise. Right concentration is developed by using two methods. As I mentioned before, the tranquility meditation called shamatha or shinay in the Tibetan. Shamatha is a Sanskrit word, shinay is the Tibetan word, and you'll see both of those. Or insight meditation, vipassana or latong. They both require preliminary practices such as moral discipline and the guidance of a teacher and a good environment conducive to meditation. So we want to have all of those ingredients available to us. So right concentration develops single pointedness of mind. I often use the example of training a puppy when I talk about training the mind. We say stay, and the trained mind can stay focused on the subject of our meditation. That's where meditative concentration or samadhi comes in. But that takes a while to train that puppy, to train the mind. It wants to run off. It's distracted by every little sound or thing. So but it's trainable. That's the good news. And that's where meditative concentration comes in. The word samadhi basically means profound absorption. So to rest in this absorption brings great benefit, but it is through concentration that we attain meditative absorption, and that leads to true wisdom and the fruition of our practice. Those are the 8 aspects of the Noble Eightfold Path that the Buddha taught, and so we went through the Noble Eightfold Path. The first, that's the 4th Noble Truth. So that is a brief description of the 4 Noble Truths and the Buddha's first turning of the wheel of Dharma. Later teachings of the Buddha are based on an understanding of these 4 Noble Truths. So we can talk, that's the first noble truth, that is the first turning of the wheel. And we were talking about the 3 yanas. So we can talk about the second turning of the wheel, which is actually the second yana. Are there any other questions or comments? Yana means vehicle. So these are the different ways that we can traverse the path that the Buddha taught, with the Shravakayana or the Theravadan view. And the next is the Mahayana view of the Bodhisattvas. So if there's no questions, if you like, I can talk about the second turning of the wheel of Dharma that happened sometime later.
I think we have one question, Lama.
Okay, what is that?
Lama, hi, Grace. Just earlier you mentioned the spread, and this does relate to what you were just talking about, and throughout the whole conversation here is, earlier you mentioned that you talked about the spread of Buddhism across the Asian countries.
Yeah.
So just curious, from your vantage point, do you see much difference between the principles or how Buddhism is practiced, say, by Vietnamese Buddhists versus Chinese Buddhists versus Thailand or Tibetan Buddhists?
There are, and that has to do with the 3 turnings of the wheel. There are different practices involved in each of those. The first turning of the wheel is practice in Southeast Asia, and those monks there from India. The Bodhidharma took the teaching to China, and he was the first Chan a patriarch, and so that led to Zen in Japan. So that is a Mahayana. That is the second turning of the wheel, and the third turning of the wheel is the Vajrayana. And yes, they are practiced differently, and that was preserved primarily in Tibet, the Vajrayana, and is what came to America when the situation occurred that our Tibetan teachers had to escape the Chinese invasion And so the diaspora, everything spread out of Tibet, and although not so great for Tibet, good for us and the rest of the world, because the training that resulted and the spread of Buddhism really expanded as a result of that. So there are differences. The foundation that we just talked about, the Four Noble Truths, are common to all, but the practices can be slightly different, even from teacher to teacher. Sometimes there are different aspects that are highlighted, but and yeah, as I continue with this, you're good at giving me the segue to the next thing.
I don't even claim to be a mind reader, trust me.
Yes,
To
well,
bother.
good job. I thank you for your help.
I thank you, but please continue. I don't want to interrupt you anymore. Go ahead. Thank you very much.
No interruption. So we talked about the first turning of the wheel, which is really has to do with the Theravadan view. But now the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, it relates more to the perfection of wisdom and the prajna paramita. The Buddha turned the wheel of Dharma for the second time at Vulture Peak. At that time, he taught the perfection of wisdom, prajna paramita, to an assembly of bodhisattvas, monks, and a host of many other beings. And he taught the complete teachings on emptiness. He said, relatively speaking, things do appear, however, they are ultimately have no essential nature, no lasting and inherent existence on the level of ultimate reality. So we have these two truths, relative and ultimate. What we can see, hear, taste, feel, touch, this is relative reality, but it is when we break it down, it doesn't have any ultimate sense. It is all empty of any essential nature, including ourselves. This so-called ego that we're always constantly trying to protect is empty of any selfness. It's selflessness. There is no self in that regard, and that is the essence of wisdom of the Buddha taught in the Prajna Paramita. So the teaching on relative and absolute truth are found in the second and third turning of the wheel. To understand emptiness, we must distinguish between relative and absolute truth, and we gain realization in the ultimate nature of phenomena. Our everyday life, is the relative world. Does not contradict this understanding, but is a part of it. This is called the realization of two truths. So this means that we study on the ultimate level the way things or phenomena really are. And on the conventional level, it's kind of how they appear, the way things occur and appear according to the laws of interdependence. There are causes and conditions that reflect that appearance. So conventional world has its relative truth, and the ultimate also has its truth. Relative truth is our conventional reality, something on which we can all agree. Relative truth includes all dualistic phenomena, including ourselves and other beings and all objects and things that we can see, hear, touch. And we experience it through the five senses. This includes all that make up our material world. And this relative world is perfect. The problem is our misapprehension and misunderstanding of its nature. So absolute truth is the reality beyond dualism, labels, and concepts. In the Mahayana, it's called emptiness, voidness, or shunyata. When we subject to analysis, the relative phenomena disappear, and all you find is absolute truth, emptiness. So understanding this perfection of wisdom, this was taught by the Buddha in the Prajnaparamita Sutras, such as the Heart Sutra. And as you know, and I'm sure you've heard of the Heart Sutra, it's recited and chanted by monks and lay Buddhists around the world. And it is from this sutra that we often find the quoted saying, form is emptiness, emptiness is also form, emptiness is no other than form is no other than emptiness. It's the realization that leads to liberation and ultimately Buddhahood. So from the Mahayana perspective, the Buddha's second turning of the wheel of Dharma is seen as the ultimate and definitive teaching. The Buddha taught that all conditioned existence is identified by the three marks of existence, that is impermanence, suffering or dissatisfaction. Impermanence, you might see it in the maybe Pali, anicca, suffering or dissatisfaction, dukkha, and no self or egolessness, anatta. these three marks apply to all conditioned things. They're impermanent. With dukkha means ignorance or misunderstanding, or that leads to our suffering, and no self, egolessness. So these are the three marks. So this is accepted in both the Theravada and Mahayana schools, but it's emphasized more in the it's emphasized in both, really. So we spoke of this when discussing the three kinds of suffering, but need to clarify it maybe a little bit, a little further. Anatta, or selflessness, or egolessness. This can be a little more difficult to grasp sometimes. The Buddha taught that there is no unchanging, permanent, existing self that inhabits our bodies. We do not have a fixed, absolute identity. Everything is in constant change and flux. We are not the same person that we were 2 seconds ago. Things are always in a change of flux. Our bodies are changing, our minds are changing, and they are not the same. But our continuity, we identify with this being, and there's a certain continuity of experience that we call an I. You know, this experience of I continuing through life as a separate singular being is an illusion. What we call the self is a construct of physical, mental, and sensory processes that are independent and constantly in flux. It is the illusion of a separate permanent self that chains us to our suffering and dissatisfaction. So we put most of our energy into protecting this image of a self, trying to gratify it and clinging to impermanent things that we think will enhance it. But that just leads to more suffering. The belief in this separate permanent self leads to craving that, according to the Four Noble Truths, is a source of our suffering. So the Buddhist teaching, especially the practice of the Eightfold Path that we just talked about, provide the medicine to cure our illusions so that we become less self-centered, less attached to impermanent things. And as we investigate and meditate upon the truth of these three marks of existence, we will develop factors of enlightenment, such as equanimity. And in so doing, we'll develop stability and serenity. And before we close, there's one more important thing that we should talk about. There is one more thing that the Buddha taught in the cycle of teaching that is also important, that I always emphasize. And in addition to the teachings on emptiness, the Buddha taught on bodhicitta, which is usually translated as the mind of enlightenment or awakened heart. This is the heartfelt wish that all beings, not just oneself, may attain the state of perfect enlightenment. And the bodhisattva pledge themselves by taking a vow to commit to work diligently to lead all beings to that enlightened state. So this commitment to working for the welfare of suffering beings until enlightenment is reached is the hallmark of the Mahayana path. It is also called the Bodhisattva Yana because it is the essence of the Bodhisattva path as well. Mahayana path, or Bodhisattva Yana, the path of the Bodhisattva. When we realize selflessness and combine this with loving kindness and compassion, it becomes the perfect Mahayana expression of bodhicitta. Questions about anything so far? We don't have a lot of time, but I should probably finish with the third turning of the wheel, which is the Mantrayana, Vajrayana aspect. Any comments or questions?
Hello.
Yes.
Have you ever heard of the concepts of the phenomenal realm and the noumenal realm?
How are you? How are we defining that?
It's like a thing in like Western philosophy. I think it's Immanuel Kant who first did it, but it's like basically we don't experience the noumenal realm, which is what we think we're experiencing as reality, but it's actually the phenomenal realm is what we're only experiencing basically like, you know, like the Matrix or whatever. We're experiencing like a construct. I don't know, it's just something you was talking about earlier. I was wondering if there was something
I think the
connection.
Buddha would say that we can realize all realms. I mean, omniscience. The Buddha is omniscient. He knows past, present, and future. He knows every aspect of, this is a definition, so I'm not sure what the noumenal realm is by definition, the way Kant or whoever the philosopher is, but the Buddha has no duality. There is not a this or a that. It is all empty of any defining factor.
Okay, thank you.
So this is, the teaching differs from the sutric approach. Yeah, so in the third turning of the wheel of Dharma to his retinue of bodhisattvas, monks, and a host of other beings, as it says, the Buddha went further into the nature of mind. And as I was saying, this teaching differs from the sutric approach, which is more gradual and takes many lifetimes, while the Vajrayana approach is considered much faster, more direct, and experiential. Both approaches seek to achieve the same realization. However, they do so by different means. And the other question is, the difference in practice. So the foundation vehicle, the Theravadan vehicle has a particular kind of practice. The Mahayana has a particular kind of practice, and the Vajrayana has a particular kind of practice. That they are somewhat different. The goal is, as it is said, is the same, but it is the direct experience that is of importance in the Vajrayana. Both approaches seek this, again, to achieve the same realization, but they do it by different means. So this third teaching is referred to by various names. I mentioned Vajrayana, Tantrayana, Mantrayana. It includes the visualization of deities in pure realms and the recitation of sacred sounds called mantras. That's why it's called Mantrayana as well. And the mind's nature is not mere nothingness, it's a state of non-existence, but a luminous awareness beyond conceptual fabrication. So it is the direct experience of the mind's emptiness and clarity, endowed with immeasurable qualities. So the Buddha clarified the nature of mind by introducing the Tathagarbha, also called Buddha nature. So which is the seed of our realization of Buddhahood? The Buddha described this as our fundamental nature that has been primordially and utterly pure from the beginning. It has never changed from beginningless time. This essence is inconceivably profound, vast, and deathless. However, the Buddha taught that this potential seed of enlightenment, our Buddha nature, is hidden by temporary obscurations. In the same way, the sun may be temporarily obscured and concealed by clouds in the sky. This prevents us from directly apprehending it. And by practicing in the above-mentioned ways, we can remove those obscurations and directly apprehend the brilliant nature of our own mind. So this completes a brief review of the Buddha's teaching on the three yanas and the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma. These trainings and methods play, a vital role in the fundamental teachings of the Buddha. To cultivate virtue, avoid wrongdoing, and tame your mind is the way we started. And this is the way we do that. This is the teaching of the Buddha. So the Buddha only taught one Dharma that people heard in different ways, depending upon their aptitude. So these teachings have been repeated for hundreds of years. And there have been different understandings and consequently different schools that have developed since the Buddha began teaching 2,600 years ago. The Theravada is the foundation for the Mahayana. The Mahayana and Theravada supports the Vajrayana and is indispensable to it. So it is essential that we begin with right view. Without right view, we can become confused. The teaching of the Buddha, called the Dharma, serves as the map, and our teachers serve as the guides on our journey. And we need a guide who can show us the path clearly to prevent us from taking wrong turns and dead ends. So we are so fortunate to have these teachings available to us and have teachers who can guide us on the path to Buddhahood.
I have a question.
Sure.
Can you explain the importance and significance of praying to past deities and bodhisattvas and bodhicittas, and when you pray to all the past people, what is the significance? Because they're all in the past.
Well, we would say they're in the past, but really they're not. They're deathless as well. Your Buddha nature is deathless, and they are as available to you right now as that they were when they were here. They've left their physical form, but they are now present in what might be called sometimes a Sambhogakaya form. It is a form, but it is not seen with the fleshy eye. It is seen with the spiritual eye. So I may take exception with that they're gone. The Buddha is not gone. His availability is still there and is close to us as hands and feet, but it is a matter of our perception. And so that is the situation. And we don't really pray asking for things in the Christian sense. We pray to God to give us stuff or to look after us. But what we would do with prayer is really to cultivate awareness. And we do prostrations as a sign of devotion and faith and a recognition of the accomplishments of those who have come before us. And we pray that we attain that same level. We have that same understanding as the Buddha. That's what we wish for.
Okay, so that when we are doing the chants, that's what you should have in your mind is you are, looking to the people, beings before you.
When you're doing a yidam practice, for example, that yidam dissolves into you at the end, and you become one with that. There is no difference between you and the yidam, between you and Chenrezi, between you and whatever it is you're doing. You are that. You are more like that than the person you think you are, and you always end with that dissolution.
Okay. Thank you for that. That helps. That explains more.
Good. Yeah, so we want to free ourselves from samsara. So we take the next step on the path and continue with joyful perseverance to completion of our journey. And as I mentioned, I think before, there are only two faults that can affect our progress on the path. The first is not starting on the path, and the second is not continuing to the end. So I wish you all great success and continuation of your practice. And Michael, is there any other announcements that need to be made before we dedicate the merit?
No, we'll be here Saturday morning for meditation at 9 a.m. Book study at 10 and Chenrezi and Amitabha practice at 10:30. That's this Saturday. Thank you very much, Lama.
All right, thank you all very much. So as I mentioned before, given the view that we've just talked about, we want to dedicate the merit. So not only are we cultivating the merit for ourselves, but we wish to cultivate the merit for the benefit of all suffering beings. So I'll do a brief a dedication of merit, and we'll do it in the English. So by the merit, by this merit of our coming together and our practice and study, may all beings attain omniscience, and may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing, and from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, and from the ocean of samsara, may we free all beings. May we free all beings. May we free all beings. I thank you all very much. Have a good rest of your evening. I will see you next month.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Stay
Thank you.
well.
Yes, you too.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night,
Night.
all.